everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm very excited today to be joined by Dr. Kandice Marchant, who does not own goats. However, she is a cheesemaker, and the road she took to get there is one that I don't think you've heard before. I know I was very surprised when I heard her speak at the North American Dairy Sheep Association's conference in the fall, and that's why I asked her to come talk to you today. Welcome to the show today, Dr. Marchand.
Thank you, Deborah. It's really a pleasure to be here.
It's so funny. I'm used to interviewing so many vets and stuff about their job and everything. And I'm like, oh, well, you're not exactly Dr. Marchand anymore. Like, because you've retired from medicine. And yes, that's the first big mic drop that you went from medicine to cheese making. It's not like you were just in medicine for a couple of months and decided you didn't like it. You had a very long and distinguished career in medicine with one of the top research hospitals in the country. So let's go back to the beginning. And could you tell people what inspired you to become a physician in the first place?
Oh, well, that inspiration goes many, many years. My father was a internal medicine doctor in Milwaukee, so I don't come from a line of cheesemakers or farmers. We do have farmers on my grandfather's side up in Manawa in Wisconsin, but my direct family was not. So I was very impressed with my dad. I followed him around a lot when I was young. In fact, I he ran an EKG, an electrocardiology lab in Wisconsin. And as a high school student, I got a chance to work in his electrocardiology lab as a technician and to meet the patients. And I was really just fascinated with, his ability to care for patients. And it was one particular episode while I was an EKG tech who was taking, the heart monitoring. I was monitoring a patient for an EKG at the hospital, and she had an acute pulmonary embolism and stopped breathing while I was doing the EKG. And as a young high school student, I could call for the nurse, but I didn't know how to do, artificial respiration or anything or CPR at the time. And it really made me want to be able to go to med school and to really help people eventually. So it was one of those kind of crystallizing moments that really galvanized my desire to go into medicine.
Yeah. And so, what was your specialty and what did your workday look like back then?
So once I went to medical school, I did my undergrad in at Northwestern in Chicago, but then did my medical training in Cleveland. I came to Cleveland for an MD, and I also enrolled in the PhD program. Some people said I could never make up my mind, so I did both the MD and the PhD at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland because they had a program that I really liked in Cleveland. I was very interested because my undergraduate was in engineering. I was very interested in implant devices like artificial hearts, artificial heart valves, artificial like blood vessels. And Cleveland had one of the best programs in that. So that's what drew me to come to Cleveland, Ohio for my training. So my specialty after I finished medical school, I did training in pathology. And pathology, people think of it as just, cutting people up for autopsies, but it's not. Pathology is really the study of disease and goes from everything from all the blood tests you've ever had. The pathologists are the ones that run the laboratories that do all of the blood testing. They're the ones that, if you've ever needed a biopsy of something to see whether you had a malignancy or another disease, the pathologist will do and interpret those biopsies. And they do all the transfusion in hospitals. So all the blood products, they handle that. They run the laboratories that do all the microbiology and study, bacteria and viruses and things like that. A lot of people call pathologists the doctor's doctor because they're the ones that help doctors understand what's the diagnosis on their patient and how to treat them.
And then, how exactly did you wind up getting interested in cheese making?
Well, that's a little bit a sideways story as well. So I'll go back to my PhD program at Case. There was a fellow PhD student there from England, and his name was Roger. And we spent a lot of time together and eventually wound up getting married. And he was a chemist from England. He was born in Birmingham, England. And we spent a lot of time then going back and forth from Cleveland to England, visiting family there. And I got to really like the after dinner cheese boards in Europe. So in Europe, they don't have cheese as snacks and appetizers like we do in the US, but they will have after a meal cheese as either a dessert or some type of a cheese presentation. And I love the European cheeses. The softer, the gooier, the stinkier, the better. And really, really got to like those cheeses. Well, one year for Christmas, he gave me a chance to go to, as a present, to go to Murray's Cheese in New York City, one of the best cheesemongers in the country. And they had a 3 day cheese boot camp where you tasted 75 cheeses paired with wines and beers. And they taught you all about the different animal styles, the animal milks, the composition of the milks, the chemistry of cheese making. And as part of the class, I had to read a chapter in a book that maybe your participants would be interested in. It's called On Food and Cooking by Harold McGee. And he goes through the chemistry of food and the chemistry of cooking. And I read the chapter on dairy during that weekend and made these like discoveries of how the chemistry of cheese making was very similar to some of the chemistry I knew in medicine, particularly how your blood clots. So my specialty within pathology was blood pathology or hematopathology. And I ran the lab that did all the blood coagulation tests. Well, it turns out that the chemistry of milk going to cheese curds is really similar to blood going to blood clots. And I went, I have to make cheese. I mean, it was one of those things. And I then started doing the Julie Julia thing where I bought cheese making books and I would on a Sunday morning play with making cheese in the kitchen, different types of cheese. So I kind of cooked my way through the cheese making book, starting at like fresh goat cheeses or ricottas or, cheese curds, and then making things like cheddars or goudas and making all sorts of different style cheese. So that was kind of the one, the thing that really hooked me into cheese making, this particular 3 day boot camp.
So how long ago was that you made your very first cheese?
It was probably back in 2010. So I would think I did the class in like 2008, 2009, and then started fiddling with cheeses around 2010.
Okay. And so initially you were just making cheese for yourself and friends and family.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I had a cheese aging facility set up in my basement. So I read about that you could take a regular refrigerator and change the thermostat. So you could buy a different thermostat that would change the set point on the refrigerator from, say, 37 degrees to about 50, 54 degrees, which is your cave temperature. So I had adjusted this refrigerator down in the basement and I was fiddling with little other ways to humidify it because cheeses, while they're aging, will need humidity and the right temperature. So that was where I was playing around for quite a few years in the basement and had my own little cheese aging facility.
And when did you start thinking, maybe when I retire from medicine, I'll start making cheese to sell?
Well, I started thinking about that maybe in 2012, 2013. And then unfortunately, my husband got quite ill in 2013 and passed away in 2014. And, it was very devastating because we were doing research together. And after he passed away, I was really looking for things to do with my spare time on weekends and things. Then I started taking some additional cheese making classes. I went to Vermont, to Sterling College in Vermont, had a 2 week artisan cheese making class. There was a cheesemaker from France, Yvonne Larcher, that came over and taught how to make French style cheeses. We spent some time at Jasper Hill Farms in the caves there, learning about affinage. And then I even went back over to England, visited Roger's family, and then took some cheese making classes up in Derbyshire as well. The School for Artisan Food there had a cheese chemistry course and they had a cheese making course there. I did a cheese class in California. So I was really thinking about, how to improve my cheese making and actually help create my own recipes as well.
As you got closer to retirement, was there a certain thing that happened, or at what point did you say, I don't want to just sit back on the beaches and, drink Mai Tais all day. I want to start a business making cheese.
I guess it wasn't just one day. It became a hobby, and I was producing cheeses for my friends. And I think what happened was there was a new shop that opened in Cleveland. It's called Ohio City Provisions, and they sell only Ohio products. The owner, Trevor Clatterbuck, has a farm about an hour and a half south of Cleveland in Stark County. And I brought some of my homemade cheeses over to his shop just to see if my style of Ohio cheese might be something he'd be interested in selling. Now, for your audience, the most of the artisan cheeses in Ohio are hard cheese. Ohio is very much known for Swiss. It's actually the biggest Swiss cheese producing state in the Union. And most of the other cheeses are hard farmstead style cheeses. A lot of Amish cheeses are cheddars. But my love, since I had the inspiration from England and Europe, I really like the soft cheeses like bries and camemberts and blue cheeses. So, I went into Trevor at Ohio City Provisions and gave him some of my cheeses to sample. And I heard back from him several months later that he really liked them, but was wondering how they would taste with some of the milk from the farm that's associated with his farm down in Stark County. So I got some of this milk from a place called Paint Valley Farms. And at the time, they had really rich, nice Guernsey cow milk. And I went home and I did the little scientific experiment where I made my cheese with the Paint Valley Guernsey milk, and I made it with the milk that I was using. I made different styles, I aged them different ways, and I brought them back to Trevor at Ohio City Provisions, and they were blown away by my little cheeses made with their rich Guernsey cow milk. And he said, you've got to make these cheeses. And I said, well, I'm still working as a doctor. I'm still working full time. And as a home cheesemaker, you can't legally sell cheese you make in your house because of the Food and Drug Administration and the dairy associations. The regulations say you have to work at a licensed facility. And he thought for a minute and then he said, aha, he says, I've got an idea. There is a dairy that's associated with our farm down in Stark County, and I don't think they're making cheese full time. Maybe they would lease you some space at the dairy and you could make your cheese under their license down there. So I took a trip down there and met the Amish guys that ran the dairy there and brought some of my cheeses for some of his associates to taste. And they were really impressed. So I essentially got to make an association with them and start cheese making down there. And because it was made under their license and they were licensed, I could legally sell it. So Trevor started selling some of my cheeses at Ohio City Provisions. I had a booth at the Shaker Square Farmers Market, and that was my initial foray into the cheese business. So that's when I formulated the cheese business, was back in 2018, and did it officially that way.
Yeah, and now you've grown a lot. Like you started with just this Guernsey milk. Now you make cheese with also with goat milk and sheep milk and I think some combinations. And you've got your own facility now. How did all of that expansion, what did all that look like?
It took a while. So while I was working full time as a physician, I really couldn't contemplate anything other than maybe making some cheeses once a month and selling them just locally at these two places because it was a pretty small volume. But, thinking ahead in my career, I thought, well, how long do I want to be a doctor? Is this business in cheese making something that, am I good enough that I could expand it? Will people buy it? So over time, starting in maybe 2019 or so, I went part time at the clinic. So I worked 3 days a week, and that would allow me to spend a little bit more time thinking about a business. So I'm not a business person. I'm a doctor. I'm not trained in retail or cheese making or food businesses. And I spent some time talking to chefs in Cleveland. I spent time talking to other cheesemakers. I joined the Ohio Cheese Guild as an enthusiast because they let you do that. And it got me access to talk to other cheesemakers in the state of Ohio and understand what an artisan cheesemaker does, what's necessary for a facility. I took some classes on building a cheese facility and, a cheese business. So I spent a lot of time learning about that. And another group that was really helpful in Cleveland, there's a small business development group that's based out of Cleveland State University and has their offices not far from my house. And I would go in with and talk to them like once a month, and they were helping me put together a business plan. What would a cheese making business look like? Now, my goal in cheese making is never to make 1,000,000 pounds of cheese and make a penny on a wheel. My interest in cheese making comes from really the academic. How are cheeses made? What are the influences of different cultures? What are the influences of different milks? So for me, that was the interesting part of the business. I want to make enough cheese to make really good and delicious cheese that's unique and different. But I don't really feel like I have to scale up and have a factory that's making 1,000,000 wheels of cheese. So that's my choice, is to stay a small artisanal. When I said I started with the Guernsey cow milk at the dairy, the manager at the dairy once said, well, I have another farmer that's got goat milk. Would you ever want any goat milk? I was like, okay, let's try it. Let's try see how the cheeses are with goat milk. Let's develop some goat milk styles. So I was starting to do that maybe about 2020, was starting to do some goat milk cheeses. And then last year, there was a new Amish family that moved into the area, I think from Missouri. They used to produce sheep milk for Green Dirt Farm, and now they're in Ohio. So now I have access to their sheep milk. So I've been working on making different styles of cheese out of sheep milk. So now the only artisan cheesemaker in Ohio that makes cow milk, goat milk, and sheep milk cheese. So I make about now 20 different types of cheese.
Wow, that is so exciting. And you've got your own retail location now, right?
Yeah, that I didn't mention during the process, but to really grow the business, even though right now I don't have a cheese making facility, that was the original plan. So pre-pandemic, my plan was to develop my own cheese making facility and a retail shop, because from a retail standpoint, the luster of putting a tent up at 5 in the morning in the rain at the farmer's market was like, it was a little hard. So I thought it would be nice to have a retail shop. You could have people eat in, to have cheese and cheese boards and things like that. So I spent about a year looking for a location. I wanted it to be urban in Cleveland because that's me. And I wanted a place that had a fair amount of foot traffic, that people could come into the shop. So I settled on a place in Cleveland Heights, which is not far from the university and the med school, where I've got a lot of people, and that the street has other bars, restaurants. It has a winemaker, and it has a couple breweries. There's a chocolate maker. So it's kind of a maker street, which worked out well with having, cheese on the street. And there's a baker. So it's got everything except a butcher and a charcuterie. So it sounded to me like it would be a really good location to have both a cheese shop and a cheese making facility. And then COVID happened. So I got the plans from the architect, the final plans for this whole facility, the day the governor shut down Ohio from COVID. The stock market crashed. And within a week, I was like, I don't know which way I should go with this business. Should I invest all of this money to make this? Who knows what's going to happen in 2 months? So I made the decision at that point that I would continue to make cheese at the Amish dairy. I knew that was a sure thing. I knew in COVID, there's no one else in that room while I was making cheese. So I could safely go down there and I could make cheese, and that I could spend the limited amount of money and put in the retail presence there. So that my thinking changed quite a bit within a week of having a very grandiose plan to have everything in one location, to, okay, let's focus on the retail. but let's still make cheese down where I know I can do it.
Do you think that at some point you might go back and add a cheese making facility, or are you really happy with the way things are right now?
I'm quite happy with the way things are right now. I could see in the future doing a cheese making facility, but probably not in the location where I am. I might look for another freestanding location as a cheese making. It gets into a bit of details, but the building that I'm in is was built, almost 100 years ago, and the infrastructure is probably not optimal for a modern cheesemaking facility with kind of creaky basement and everything else. So I think I would probably look for a freestanding building of some sort, or somebody else who has a food manufacturing facility and maybe have some space I could do that there. But at the moment, I'm happy with the way things are.
So let's go back just for 1 minute to when you were learning to make cheese. Is there something that you would say to somebody who's just now learning and, of course, hitting a few bumps in the road, having a few batches that don't quite turn out the way you had planned? What would you say to them?
Well, I think that, there's a lot of literature out there. There are a lot of YouTubes and other podcasts about making cheese. I'm a firm believer in, if you can, take a hands-on cheese making class. And that's one thing I've added to my shop. I now do cheese making classes twice or three times a month, usually on Sunday afternoons. And they're not just demonstration classes. They get their hands wet and they make everything from, ricotta to farmer's cheese to cheese curds to cottage cheese. And a lot of people, they ask a lot of questions during the class. So it's a really good back and forth session in terms of giving them suggestions in terms of what equipment do you need at home? How do you sanitize things? What if this doesn't work out? What are the fixes I can do? Say I add this and it doesn't work. How do I troubleshoot a batch of cheese? So I think that's really, really helpful. And I have fun with it. And I think the people that come to the classes have fun with it.
So, what do you think is next for you in this next chapter of your life? Like different cheeses or collaborations or a book or
Well, the interesting that you say a book. I have been thinking about that. There's so many books on cheese making, though, but I think maybe my personal story of kind of a journey of how you get into, my what's the one phrase I've used? Be careful what you ask for, or hobbies that get out of control, which is kind of what this was. It kind of took over. It was a little hobby that just got bigger and bigger. But for me, I think my love of this industry is really in the creativity and the artistry in making new cheeses. I love coming up with new recipes. Like last year, I came up with two new blue cheeses, a Guernsey cow milk blue and a sheep blue that I call Lamberton blue. And I happen to live on Lamberton Road, so it seemed to make some sense. But the cow milk blue won a blue ribbon at the state fair last year, so that was good. I'm working on some mixed milk cheeses like the Italian Robiola, that's a cow, goat, and sheep milk cheese. And I think the mixed milk cheeses are fascinating. And if I've got access to all three, why not try something like that? So making the new cheeses is really one of the things I really love.
that is awesome. I love your story so much because I think that so many people are under the assumption that, if they want to have an artisan cheese business, that they have to start with the homestead and the animals, the goats or the sheep or cows or whatever. And it's wonderful that you've proven that you can just skip right over that. I mean, honestly, that's a hard part, is dealing with all the animals and stuff. If what you really love is making the cheese, you can just focus on making the cheese while somebody else who really loves raising the animals can focus on just raising the animals.
I think that's a really good point. And I made that decision very early on. I'm not a farmer, and I don't think there's any way that I physically could handle a herd of animals and milk them and make the cheese and try to sell it and market it. And I think I would do a disservice to many aspects of the business. But I think the crucial thing, though, is getting access to really good milk. In order to make really good cheese, you need access to good milk. So you either need to, know local farmers that you can get really fresh milk from, or suppliers that there are more and more suppliers now that are producing what I would call gently pasteurized milk so that they're low temperature vat pasteurized. They're not the high temperature, and God forbid, don't try it with ultra pasteurized milk, but a low temperature vat pasteurized milk. The A2 milks, like the Guernsey cows that have the A2 casein proteins, is more digestible. So trying to get really good milk from that. And, if you can find a farmer that's producing really good goat milk that's not ultra pasteurized, and that's a hard one, trying to find that. And sheep milk is almost impossible to buy commercially, at stores. But you can get really good milk, Jersey, Guernsey, especially from some local farmers.
Yeah, this has been so fascinating. I know my husband is going to love this episode because he's kind of turned into the cheesemaker of the family. So you might see him in your shop someday in Ohio after he gets wind of this because he just loves trying to make new cheeses and stuff. So, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
Well, I don't know. Final thoughts in terms of cheese making businesses. I think if you really want to, come up with a business for cheese making, have a niche in terms of what you do that's unique compared to other cheesemakers. Or even if you want to sell cheeses, make sure you have a niche, some hook that will make you unique and different. Like for me, I'm the only eat-in cheese shop in the whole Cleveland area, and I'm the only one that makes our own cheeses. So for me, that was a unique way to get started to market our cheeses. So I think if you're thinking of doing it at home, for a homestead cheese making, I think, understanding how you make the cheese and how small things in cheese making can make huge differences in the final cheese that you're making. So I think, depending on what you're thinking of doing, if you're starting a business or if you really just want to make cheese at home, do a lot of reading, do a lot of talking to people. There are a lot of groups that you can, join a cheese guild as an enthusiast. You may learn a lot. You'll learn how to make your cheese, really, really special.
I love what you said about if you want to do this as a business, to find something unique to do. I always tell people if you're doing any kind of a homestead business or artisan business, like with cheese, you're not going to compete with craft.
No.
You need to create something of your own that when they think of cheese, they think of you, not like, oh, what cheese is on sale what cheddar is on sale this
Yeah.
week.
I think that, the whole promotion of artisanal cheeses is so important that people understand what goes into making them and why they're unique and why they're different, because they are very different than your commodity cheddars, which are great. But, if you need to portray your product as something unique and different, understand what's different about it and be able to speak to that to a consumer about how you make your cheese. And I think people get really excited when they understand, how I make the cheese and that I add extra cream to this and I layer them in the molds and I do this. And then they understand that there's something more to that than just mass produced cheeses.
Yeah, exactly. A mass-produced cheese that's made entirely by machines.
Yeah.
So I have loved this conversation. It has been so much fun, and I know our listeners are going to love it too. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you afterwards, how can they find you online?
We have a website for the business. It's marchantmanor.com and contact us through that. We have an email at info@marchantmanor.com. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook. We're also on those too.
Awesome. We will definitely be sure to put those in the show notes for people in case they're driving or something. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I've had a great time.